The year 2000 signified that we were in a new millennium and just about everybody on planet Earth was going crazy over this 4-digit number, and there were many significant things that happened. You had the whole Y2K bug, the release of arguably the greatest gaming system to ever exist, Eminem becoming an overnight star, and so many other newsworthy events that made 2000. Focusing in on the WWE, this was their year. There were just so many things that WWE did right with the product during this period, to the point that many argued that this is the greatest year in the company's history, and I 100% agree. Let's get into the many reasons why 2000 is WWE's best year. Some of the most outlandish and memorable moments in the Attitude Era occurred between 1997 and 1999. But if you go back and watch Raw during this time like I did, you'll very quickly notice that it's the pure definition of Crash TV. During his time as head writer, Vince Russo cultivated Raw into a show where the majority of the storylines and big moments were created solely for shock value and controversy. The beginning of the Attitude Era was raunchy, wild, and exhilarating for the most part, but you could only rely on shock value for so long before the audience would get tired of it and want more substance out of the product. In October of 1999, Vince Russo was replaced as the head writer by Chris Kresge, and within a couple of months, you could easily see the stark contrast between their writing styles. While Vince Russo heavily relied on shock value and booked things at a fast pace, Chris Kresge, on the other hand, planned out complex storylines while allowing them a chance to breathe, but most of all, his storylines felt like they were actually made for wrestling. Chris Kresge was the ingredient that the WWF needed in order to create the best version of the Attitude Era, and it worked out extremely well. If you were to compare how the product was in April of 99 to April in 2000, it was completely night and day. How the Attitude Era was booked during the early stages was cool to an extent, but what made 2000 the greatest year in comparison was the new focus on creating an intriguing and entertaining wrestling show. So many of the storylines from this year were extremely memorable, and it's a direct result of Chris Kresge becoming the head writer. Just a few examples. The Eddie and Chyna storyline, which helped showcase that Eddie wasn't just a good wrestler, but he was entertaining too, and also showed a different side to Chyna, and how she wasn't just this big muscular woman who was a former bodyguard for DX, but there was a lot more to her. The Mick Foley and Triple H feud where Cactus Jack returned, and he even put his career on the line, and this feud generated great moments and classic matches as well. The love triangle between Kurt Angle, Stephanie McMahon, and Triple H, where Kurt was very obvious with his intentions, but it left you, the viewer, trying to figure out who Stephanie McMahon would end up choosing in the end. Now, memorable doesn't exactly mean great, because during this year, we got the whole whodunit story, which had potential, and then, well, you know. And Mae Young being pregnant with Mark Henry, aka Sexual Chocolate's kid, and giving birth to a hand, which was just, it was something. 2000 was the year of memorable storylines, some bad, some just plain weird, but the majority of them were great and put butts in seats every Monday and Thursday night. One of the most important things that can either help improve or even save a wrestling product is roster depth. And in 2000, the roster was filled to the brim with talent. Roster depth is extremely important because if a top guy or gal goes down with an injury, for example, the company can rely on the other talents on the roster to carry the load. And besides, the audience needs to be somewhat invested in multiple acts on the show, not just a few wrestlers. During this time, there was something for everybody to enjoy, whether that be in the main event, and sometimes even in the lower card division. The roster was so diverse during this time, and there were multiple aspects of the show that could appeal to different types of viewers. Almost every part of the show felt like a fresh breath of air because you were getting something different depending on which division and wrestlers were getting screen time at the moment. It honestly felt as if all the cogs were running smoothly and everything was interconnected. It never felt like certain stories or wrestlers were disconnected from the rest of the product and doing their own thing in their own universe. The Codyverse in AEW. Everything flowed so smoothly, and during these days, you used to actually care about the mid-card. At the end of the day, not everybody can be a top guy. There's a reason the mid-card division exists, and during this run, there was a lot of effort that was put forth into making the whole show must-see television. JR and Jerry the King Lawler were in their absolute prime during the year of 2000, and their commentary almost always added so much more to the product. You had the goofy, heel, perverted commentator in King, who could always make you laugh or do a double take at some of his ridiculously out-of-pocket comments about the women, a lot of which haven't aged well. Or made you hate the heels even more when he co-signed them and pulled excuses out of his ass to justify why they were in the right. JR was the straight man in the face in this commentary duo who would always present you with the facts, but more importantly, his investment and passion for wrestling during this point could genuinely make you believe at certain times that it was real. JR's commentary style is unparalleled, and there's a reason why many fans, including myself, consider him to be the greatest wrestling commentator. These two, especially Jim Ross, were the voices of an entire generation and helped bring even more life into the special moments in wrestling that defined my childhood. Two of the biggest contributors that made 2000 such a successful year for the company were the string of classic pay-per-views and stellar matches. When you pump out so much content within a year, it's pretty hard to consistently put on great shows all around and not have more than a few of those pay-per-views end up being average or straight up stinkers. Somehow, WWE went on an all-time run and produced great pay-per-views all back to back. They kicked off the new millennium with the Royal Rumble, and I'm pretty sure you already know this, but this show was something special. You got Taz making his debut in Madison Square Garden to crazy reception and proceeding to put Kurt Angle in the Taz mission and choke him out, which made for a very memorable debut. The Hardy Boys and the Dudley Boys faced each other in an inaugural table match and absolutely fucking tweaked and gifted us fans with wrestling spots we still remember to this day. Triple H versus Cactus Jack. Those two men absolutely tore the house down in a phenomenal street fight. For almost 30 minutes, Triple H and Mick Foley dished out nothing but pure violence against one another, and although it was brutal, it was beautiful. Moving on to the main event, the Royal Rumble match itself was memorable in its own right. It was definitely an entertaining Royal Rumble with the likes of Too Cool and Rikishi dancing with each other and getting an insane pop from the crowd. Thinking about that in kayfabe terms is funny because these mofos really stopped in the middle of the Royal Rumble to start dancing. The Royal Rumble match, aka the match which guarantees you a title shot for the WWF Championship, it makes them look a little dumb in kayfabe because they basically said, "Fuck the title, let's dance." And then Rikishi eliminated Too Cool because, hey, business is business. This infamous Taka Michinoku faceplant. And in the end, the final two men in the match were The Big Show and The Rock, where The Rock ended up winning the Rumble. Although, technically if we go by the rule, The Big Show won the Royal Rumble because The Rock's feet actually touched the ground, but moving on. The 2000 Royal Rumble set the standard for high quality pay-per-views during that year's cycle, and many other ones like SummerSlam, Fully Loaded, Unforgiven, and others would follow suit. All of those pay-per-views had great matches in the main event and the undercard, with special moments occurring on the shows as well. Even some of the average pay-per-views like WrestleMania 2000 and Armageddon include at least one memorable match that people still talk about. I don't know what was in the air during this time, but it seems like everything just seemed to click with everyone in the locker room because the chemistry they had with one another helped to create unforgettable shows and matches. After reaching their breaking point over their mistreatment in WCW and realizing that they would never get the recognition that they truly deserved, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn jumped ship from WCW to the WWF. The group of four was dubbed as the Radicalz and immediately made an impact when they debuted in the January 31st episode of Raw. In the Radicalz, you had four great workers and two future main eventers in Guerrero and Benoit. The Radicalz jumping ship from WCW was a huge gain for WWE. WCW never saw the true potential in this crew, particularly in Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit, and as a result, WCW carelessly handed two future main eventers away on a silver platter and made themselves look even dumber than they already did at this time, which you wouldn't think was possible, but then again, it was 2000 WCW, so... Another important aspect as to why the Radicalz jumping over to the WWF was important was because along with other guys like Kurt Angle and Chris Jericho, they single-handedly had a tremendous impact on the in-ring aspect of the product. During the Attitude Era, there was more importance held on the entertainment aspect than the in-ring aspect, and sometimes it really showed. With the contribution of these six guys, the work rate of the product across the board increased tenfold. They not only had major chemistry with each other, but they also had great chemistry with the likes of The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, and so many others. You no longer had to potentially wait for a pay-per-view in order to get a good match. You were getting good TV matches on Monday and Thursday too. And although those 6 guys were a part of the main reason why the work rate shot up during the year, they weren't the only people who were tearing the house down. The tag team division was thriving during the Attitude Era, especially in comparison to the state of the division today, but it arguably was at its absolute peak during this year. From 1998 to 1999, the New Age Outlaws ruled the division and were on top, but once 2000 rolled in, many new tag teams would step onto the playing field and play a huge part in making this such an iconic year. The Dudley Boys, the Hardy Boys, and Edge and Christian. What more do I need to say? These 3 tag teams absolutely tore the house down, and with the 3 teams' affinity for tables, ladders, and chairs respectively, they birthed TLC. By creating not only a new, but exhilarating match type, all 6 men put their bodies and careers on the line every time they stepped into the ring. I don't even know how, but somehow they were always able to top their last TLC match and made it their mission to make the next one even more memorable. All 3 of these matches set the standard, and this match type even ended up becoming a pay-per-view and made it a challenge for wrestlers in the future to try and top these matches. Besides those tag teams, you also had the APA and Too Cool, who were super over and entertaining. Sure, they weren't revolutionizing tag team wrestling, but once again, they were over as hell and always made you laugh whenever they popped up on screen. The APA were no-nonsense big guys who liked to drink beer, smoke cigars, and play cards, and as a result, they were instantly likable, and the fans loved them. Their pay-for-hire gimmick was entertaining because all you had to do was offer them beer, money, or that, and they would instantly make their way to the ring and beat the hell out of the people they were hired to beat up by their clients. Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexay went from being predominantly featured on WWE's B and C shows to being repackaged from Too Much into Too Cool. The 2 of them got over super quickly with the fans because of their dancing gimmick that they would often drag other wrestlers into, and the goddamn worm out of all things. The worm being one of the most over things in WWE at the time just goes to show you how special not only 2000 was, but how special the Attitude Era was as a whole. Because even the stupidest things got over as long as it was entertaining. Jericho and Angle during this year were just different. Kurt Angle made his debut at Survivor Series in 1999, and if I could go back in time and tell someone after watching his debut that within a year he would be one of the biggest stars in the company and have the best rookie year in wrestling, they would probably laugh at me. Kurt Angle very quickly adapted from being this cookie-cutter babyface that the fans couldn't get behind because they could see right through that, who labeled himself as an Olympic hero and criticized the crowd for not following his 3 eyes. Unless my memory deceives me, I rarely remember him following his own 3 eyes, but anyways, within a year, Kurt Angle would become the Eurocontinental Champion, win the 2000 King of the Ring, and become WWF Champion after defeating The Rock at No Mercy. Even with the monster push he was getting, it all felt so natural because Kurt Angle was made for wrestling. Not even just the physical aspect of it, but the entertainment side as well. Moving on to Chris Jericho, by the time 2000 rolled around, he had been in the company for a couple of months after making his memorable debut on Raw in '99. It took him some time to get situated into a proper position within the company, but even through all of that, no matter if Chris Jericho was being centered in the main event or the upper mid card, he was always getting some of the loudest pops of the night. He was definitely a workhorse during this year, but was able to connect with the fans on such a unique level that it didn't matter where he was positioned on the card. Once the crowd heard the countdown from his entrance music, they always went nuts. When you have huge baby faces on your roster, such as Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, and The Undertaker, you need somebody that's going to be the top heel who can oppose those guys, and Triple H was him. Triple H's look and his character started to evolve in 1999 when he went from being the leader of DX looking like this to looking like this and being the top heel in the company. In '99, the McMahon-Helmsley faction was born, and he also cut the infamous backstage promo with JR where he nicknamed himself The Game. During this period, Triple H was the best version of himself, and let me tell you, heel Triple H in 2000 was genuinely something special. From his top-tier heel work, the natural ability to get heat with the crowd, to the infamous matches that he was involved in during this time, you can't tell me that this isn't the best version of him. He was putting in so much work, and it really shows, considering the fact that he was involved in the majority of the biggest angles during this year and pay-per-view main events. As much flack as Triple H gets for, well, being Triple H, I have to give him credit where it's due and appreciate his mindset for the business, because when he realized that the company needed a top heel in order to combat the babyfaces, he set out to be the most hated man on the roster, and he definitely achieved that. Triple H during this year acted like such a piece of shit that he constantly left Jim Ross in a state of disbelief at just how low he was willing to go.
Why, Triple H? You son of a bitch! Why? Tell me why!
I couldn't possibly forget the greatest reason why 2000 was such a special year in the company's history, right? 1999 ended off with the huge question on the mind of many fans. How was the WWF going to move forward without Austin? Stone Cold was written off TV at Survivor Series in order to get neck surgery, and he would be away from the company for almost the entire year. Since 1997, Austin had been the top guy in the company, and now the WWF was going to have to figure out a way to move forward without him for almost an entire year. The company needed a star who could carry the WWF on their back and become the top guy in lieu of Austin's absence. Enter the year 2000, the year of The Rock. The Rock by the end of 1999 was a main eventer and was insanely over with the crowd after turning babyface after a lengthy heel run. But he wasn't the top guy. That spot was reserved for Austin. With Austin healing up back at home and out of action for almost the entire year, The Rock now had the spotlight shined on him and was determined to show everyone from the fans to the company itself that he wasn't a replacement for Stone Cold. He was The Rock, the second top guy of the Attitude Era who was Austin's equal. The Rock during this time absolutely went off and became the top babyface of the company. He had the crowd in the palm of his hands with his promo skills and could flip the switch between being serious or an absolute goofball. From the numerous amount of iconic and funny catchphrases he invented, to the hilarious backstage segments and promos he was involved in, you knew whenever The Rock had the mic in his hands, it was time to listen. Something else that made The Rock even better during this year was his improved work rate. He was involved in a number of memorable matches during this year, and you couldn't consider him one of those wrestlers who could deliver on the mic, but couldn't deliver in the ring. He truly did it all. He was involved in almost every single pay-per-view main event for the year, and in total, he was involved in 10 out of the 12 for that year's pay-per-view cycle. The Rock made it his mission in 2000 to ensure that the company putting their trust in him to carry it wasn't a mistake. 2000 and WWE will forever be a year that's ingrained into the history books. There were just so many unforgettable moments and matches that occurred during this time that made it such a monumental year. Something that's pretty interesting to me is how this is considered to be the greatest year in the company's history, and yet Stone Cold Steve Austin was absent for the majority of it. Let me know in the comment section down below whether you agree or not that 2000 is WWE's greatest year and why. Don't forget to hit the like button, and if you want more content about the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression Era, to hit the subscribe button. I'm GG, and I truly believe that 2000 is the greatest year in WWE history.